Thank you.
That's an expensive cover.
Welcome to the Monday, December 2nd meeting of the Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School Committee. Those watching at home are reminded that they can access the packet of materials for this meeting outlined at the district's website. Our first item of business will be the citizen question and comment period, followed by a finance subcommittee meeting update that will be presented. I'd first like everybody to rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our policy on public participation at meetings can be found on the table with the agenda. The public is reminded that a school committee meeting is a meeting of a governmental body at which members of the body deliberate over public business. We welcome your attendance and appreciate your interest in viewing your school committee as we conduct our regular business meeting. The school committee believes that the school district community should have an opportunity to comment to the committee on issues that affect the school district and are within the scope of the school committee's responsibility. Some questions you may have may not be within the scope of the committee's responsibilities. In that case, I will suggest that you send or give your question in writing to the appropriate person so that your concern may be given proper consideration. This is an opportunity for individuals to address the topics on the agenda. Each citizen will be allowed to speak for no more than 3 minutes. Tonight we will allow up to 15 minutes for public comment should it be needed. So our public comment period is open. Would anybody like to make comment? Please approach the microphone and identify yourself.
Vita Morris. I was most interested in reading in the Register an article in one of the latest issues on the solar panel project on their capped landfill, which will produce 6 megawatts of solar power. And the town of Dennis only needs half of that to power its buildings, apparently. The other half, 3 megawatts, I guess, will be offered to the school district and to the water district in the town of Dennis. The proposed savings for that project are in the area of about $700,000. So compared to what the CVEC people have come up with for 4 megawatts of power here in for their project at $195,000 the first year, it comes in at less than half what it should be according to what this project in Dennis would produce. Also, I think it was very interesting that the article mentioned that the national trend for solar farming or solar projects is to use landfills and brown fields, which is a quote, which seems to make sense, and not to cut down trees. Apparently, the CVEC, if I remember correctly, project here in town would cut about 20 acres of trees. And trees absorb a lot of kind of the greenhouse gases and other pollutants, and to do that, I think is almost a shame. It's like you exchange one thing for another. So I think there's even CVAC's own second presentation of about 3 weeks ago showed that their projects here on the Cape are on landfills in Eastham and in Chatham. I guess I would like to have an explanation of how much of that power, because if we get even a third of that 3 megawatts, that should be enough to replace the Matakees ground mount, and that way you can leave the residents of that area in peace, and stop badgering the zoning board to accommodate, kind of manufactured deadlines or what have you. So I would like to know what's the story on this particular situation, the project from Dennis, and what kind of mega powers we can expect to be able to get from them.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Being that there is nobody here from CVEC to answer your questions directly, we can get you those answers offline. We don't have them here, being that there's, like I said, there's nobody here from CVEC to answer your questions about CVEC. So we'd be happy to get you some answers to your questions.
We will be tapping into that. The district will be tapping in, just let me say, it doesn't matter if, but we will be tapping into that particular power.
We will get you some answers to your questions. Thank you. Anyone else like to speak from the audience? Seeing no one, we will move on to our student representative report from Mr. Patrick Hanberry, please.
Thank you. So as I'm sure you all know, the DY football team won last Saturday, so they will be going to the Super Bowl this Saturday in Gillette Stadium. Thank you. So they performed, or they didn't perform, but they played a non-seasonal game against Nauset on Thanksgiving Day for the annual Chowder Cup, in which they won. And that was a very well-attended event, and there was an abundance of DY alumni, which was very special. Away from football as well, the DY Student Council attended the annual CMAS conference, and that's the Southeastern Massachusetts Association of Student Councils. And that was a good 4 or 5 hour day, in which the Student Council was able to go and participate in different leadership activities, and heard that was a great success as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanberry. I had asked Mr. Jenks before the meeting how we could get tickets to go to the Super Bowl so that we can pack Gillette Stadium with green and white, and my understanding is that tickets are available at Ticketmaster. I thought I had overheard a parent saying that the seats, I'm sorry? And at the event, and I thought I had overheard a parent saying that tickets were $17 a seat. Perhaps it's a...
17 for adults and I think 14 for kids? Right. And for students and seniors.
So we're gonna, like I said, pack the stadium with green and white, go DY. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Hanberry from the board? Thank you, Mr. Hanberry. Next up is our Dennis-Yarmouth Selectmen Liaison, starting with Mr. Carey from Dennis, please.
No, no particular report this evening, but I think it would be a good opportunity to share with the public that during the holiday season, as we're approaching Christmas and out of Thanksgiving and into the winter break, that all the schools have a great need for their students at this particular time of the year. Some of it is actually clothing in some of the elementary grades, in coats and things like that. If anybody at home wants to make donations, I know there's a fund at the high school that helps support families that are in need, that I think it's Dale Fornoff gets gift cards and through Stop and Shop, and those gift cards go home to families within need. And I know each and every school in our district does something. So if anybody is at home, wants to do something out of the ordinary, a little bit off the radar, each and every one of our schools could use some kind of benefit for their families at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Does anybody have questions for Mr. Carey? If I could bounce off of that discussion, I'd also like to say a thank you to the DY Create the Good group that put together a lot of Thanksgiving Day baskets for a lot of families in need. For anyone at home that may or may not be hesitant to donate to these things, the families that receive the benefits from these are strictly confidential. These donations go to families via the social workers and folks like that in the school, so they do remain anonymous, and it's a nice way to help our neighbors and friends. So thank you very much. We'll move on to the Finance Subcommittee update. We're going to start, by the looks of it, with FY13 E&D certification. I believe Mr. Azer will be taking this, or Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards has deferred to Mr. Azer.
He's deferred to the second half.
Tag, you're it.
Thank you. There are, for the folks in the audience, is some copies of the handout by the front door if you would like a keepsake of it. I would, so our agenda, we have 3 things to discuss tonight. We're going to talk about our E&D for FY13. We're going to give you an update on the finances for FY14, and we're going to go from there into a revenue projection for FY15. The information that we're going to go through is all interrelated, so I would suggest that if we can hold the questions till the end, because some of the questions that may come up in one section are likely to be answered in the next section. So just in the sake of continuity, I would recommend that. Oh, can someone restart later, please? I think we're going to get this again tonight. It'll take about an hour. Yeah. All right, but first, we have a coming attraction, as Mr. Handbury mentioned. We have the Super Bowl on Saturday. We'll be playing Doherty High School out of Worcester. Again, that's Saturday, the December 7th. Our game is at 11 o'clock. And as Mr. Poole mentioned, and folks, you can get tickets in advance on Ticketmaster, or you can buy them at the gate that day. Parking is free at Gillette Stadium that day, so no worries there. I have no comment on that. So we'll start off with the E&D. Sure, this is a chart you've seen before. This is how much we have applied from E&D to the budget each year. As you can see, over the last 8 or 9 years, it's been plus or minus $1 million that we've applied to the budget each year, which reduces the assessments to the member towns. For the current year, we applied $1,250,000, an increase from prior years, and part of that went towards the iPad initiative, which I believe, as we talked about last meeting, we rolled out the 6th grade a couple weeks ago, and that, as far as I know, seems to be going pretty well. So I want to talk about the certification for FY13. And the reason the fiscal years bounce back and forth because we have to set aside money we're going to apply to the following fiscal year before the current year closes. So we put aside $1,250,000 for FY14, but FY13 didn't close, and the Department of Revenue comes in over the summer, and they do their calculations based on our financials, and then certify our number, similar to they would certify free cash for a city or a town. So we start off with the number of the FY12 number. We were if you remember, we certified it a little over $2 million. Then we add to the E&D balance by any unspent expenditures, which last year was only about $5,300, and then a revenue that's received over what we budgeted, which for last year was $526,000. So those get added to the E&D balance. Then we take away what we applied to the current year's budget, which is the $1,250,000. So we add the two on the left, we subtract on the right, and we get a subtotal of $1,312,000. However, there is a second part to that process, and that is because when the DOR comes in and reviews all the accounts, you can't have accounts with negative balances. And due to some timing issues and other circumstances, we did have a couple of accounts that had negative balances last year. The first one was the Baker project, which we finally closed out this summer. We should be getting our last reimbursement from the state in a couple of weeks. It's a small portion. It's only about $25,000. But if you remember, we didn't bond the project until the middle of September. The DOR calculates on the fiscal year, which ends June 30th. So we were carrying a balance, the district was carrying a balance until September. And it was a $493,000. Now, since then, we bonded the project and received the bond proceeds, and most of that balance has now gone down. But when they do the calculation as of June 30th, it's $493,000 that was negative. As you can see on the right-hand side, since then, we've received $322,000. So there's only $171,000 remaining in that balance, and of that, $113,000 is the septic system that we replaced over 2 years ago. That we're still working on trying to get that reimbursed or resolved somehow with the town. So the bulk of what's remaining there is the septic system, but because of the timing of the bonding, we missed the cutoff to be included in the calculation for this fiscal year, but the good news is when we do this calculation next summer, we'll get the credit back for it. Another smaller project that we did that was, again, completed over the summer was we replaced the vertical lift at Emmy Small. We, due to some issues we were having with the operation of the lift, the project wasn't fully closed out. The way those projects work with the towns is we pay for it up front. We submit the invoices to the town, they reimburse us the funds. Again, because of the delays we had with the project, we didn't get reimbursed from the town until just 2 weeks ago. So again, due to the timing of it, it was a hit to the E&D, but next year it won't be there. The last section is other accounts. It's some of it are some grants, and that's due to some timing because of federal grants. Federal grants run on the federal fiscal year, which is September to August. So when they calculate as of June 30th, sometimes you have negative balances because the last batch of funds hasn't been received yet. And the other part of that is food services. I don't want to get off into a whole tangent on it, but I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions folks have later. But in a nutshell, with the food service program, as you know, we have I think the highest population of free and reduced students on the Cape. And a lot of kids sometimes come in, they don't have the money for the lunch for that day, we let them charge it. They can put it on their account. In the last year, if you recall, we put in a computerized point of sale system. So on the one hand, it was good, they could get to the line faster and so on and so forth, but the flip side is it made it easier for kids to charge, and it then becomes a challenge to recoup that money. So of the $142,000 that's listed there, about $100,000 of it was from food services, and about $50,000 of we've collected since then. We've gotten more diligent in recouping those funds. So I firmly believe we'll catch up on that, and that shouldn't be an issue going forward. But last year being the first year of it, and with other things going on in food services and in general with changes in laws on the reimbursements and things like that, it was a bit of a transition year, but I think we'll straighten that out going forward. So again, we see on the top there, we had the subtotal of $1,312,000 from the first page. What the DOR does is they subtract any of those deficits, which are the three things I just went through, which totaled a little over $700,000. That comes out of E&D when they go to certify E&D. So that leaves us with a certified E&D balance of $608,000. Now, as I said, since they've done their certification, we've already received over $400,000 of that portion that was short. So when we factored in for next year, if we look at the chart of certified, so again, you can see the green there is what was actually certified, but this little yellow block is what we've collected since then. So really, we're a little over $1 million. It's still a little short of what we had thought we would be. We thought it would be around 1.2, 1.3 perhaps, because we knew of things that took place last year. We we thought it would be reduced from what it had been in prior years. It was a little bit lower than we had thought. So obviously, we're going to have to deal with that as we move forward. One of the things, this just shows a history comparing what was certified versus what was applied. And as I said, the red arrows indicate sort of the flow of how it works. So we'll take the FY, this is 2002, for example. We had 620,000 certified. We took 300,000 of that and applied it to the following year's budget, which was just under 50%. As you can see, in the last several years, it's been with the exception of FY11, it's been around 60, 65%. So it's been pretty consistent. But you can see here, if we only have 608,000 right now, we can't apply more than that to next year's budget. So if we take these kind of trends, you can see where this is going. And when we get into the revenue projection for next year, we'll see exactly what the impact of that is going to be. But we just want to give you the explanation of that. Normally, we just give you the memo and say it's been certified, but because of where the number came in this year, we wanted to make sure we give you the explanation of where we're at. Yeah.
The long and short of it, Larry, is that we're not going to be able to do $1 million for E&D for the following year.
Correct.
And so that means the assessments to the towns are going to go up, depending upon how that all works. 'Cause usually we chip in $1 million or thereabouts, and it reduces their assessments. I think Mr. Egan said that one day that we were going to run into this problem, so it seems like we're running into it now. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yeah, I think that's a
Or
fair
am I
assumption.
correct in saying what I'm saying?
Yes, I would say you're
Dead
generally
on.
correct in that.
Good,
Yep.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's correct to say that the assessments are necessarily going
Right,
up.
true.
The budget will not go up to reflect that.
No, I'm talking about the money that we applied, I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
wasn't clear on
but
that.
that doesn't mean that even if we can't apply the whole million, doesn't mean the assessments to the two towns will go up.
Okay.
You'll see that on another slide
Right.
later.
Correct, thank you. So segueing into the current fiscal year, we'll start off with our revenue comparison. Obviously, the two towns' assessments, we're going to receive, we've either already received or we expect to receive everything that was budgeted for, therefore the balance is zero. On the state aid, which includes Chapter 70, includes transportation, and includes charter school reimbursement, we expect to receive about $75,000 more than we budgeted. And on the district revenue, which includes obviously the E&D that we applied, but also Medicaid and other miscellaneous accounts, we're looking at about $28,000 less than budgeted. So the bottom line on the revenue side, we should be about $47,000 over the budget. And again, so that would, if there are any excess revenues, those would be applied to the E&D balance as well. Now we go into the expense side. On the salary, in the past, when I've done this presentation, I've gone through each of the departments and gone through one by one, but I think the easiest thing to do tonight, given where we're at, where you'll see where we're at, is let's start off with the top, or really the bottom line, and work our way backwards through that. Our salaries right now, we're currently $362,000 available. However, if you recall, we don't have a way to encumber anticipated salaries for substitutes, for advisors, professional development stipends, and so on, which we anticipate will probably be about $300,000 for the rest of the year, which would encapsulate most of that available salary balance. On the expense side, we're running a little more than $1 million over budget. So when you factor the combination of those together, on paper right now, it's a gap of $697,000. When you add in the anticipated expenses to come for the subs and professional development and so on, it pushes it close to $1 million. So that's what we're facing right now. But we want to, rather than lead you along and throw that at the end, figure let's start off with that as the point and work our way from there. The primary reason, and really the sole reason for this gap, is our out-of-district tuition. which includes not only school choice and charter tuition, but also special education tuition. If you compare that to all the other accounts, all the other salary accounts, all the other expense accounts, the utilities, the salaries, busing, everything else is to the positive, and the out-of-district tuition is to the negative by a factor of 2. So that is what is driving this gap right now. If we look at the detail of it, on the top section is the special ed tuition. You can see is more than $600,000 over budget right now. We've been, again, I don't want to get into a lot of the details because of privacy, but we've been getting some significant tuitions coming in for out of district, some of them being residential, which obviously are at a higher expense. And I know that our special ed director, our pupil service director, Ms. Dion, she works very diligently at trying to do cost sharing and trying to work those as best we can. But right now, as we stand today, we have that significant deficit in those accounts. In the past years, the state has had a mechanism for extraordinary special ed tuition expenses. In prior years, that process has not opened up until January, and districts have not heard decisions till about March. So we're hopeful that that will continue, and we will be eligible to receive some funds out of that. It's sort of like an accelerated circuit breaker reimbursement, where in circuit breaker you get reimbursed the following year. With this extraordinary expenses, is you get the funds back in the current year. It's because, again, for things like this, you can see we're 35% over budget. That's a burden that most districts, if not all districts, really can't bear in the current year because there's just nowhere to cover that from. On the bottom side, on the choice and charter tuition, as I believe I've covered in previous reports to you, the budget number or their projected numbers we're using are still off the state cherry sheets because those enrollments don't become official until the end of the month. So the next time we have this report, those numbers could change. Hopefully they change for the positive, but as of right now, we're almost 20% over budget in those as well. So added together, all those out of tuition expenses are creating a gap of over $1.3 million, and that is largely driving the entire budget scenario right now. So just to go quickly through the different departments, again, district-wide administration, the salary is slightly over. We hired a technology person in the spring who it was slightly higher than the budget, but we'll be able to cover that. We just haven't made that adjustment yet. And on the expense side, the unencumbered funds represent the amount we've budgeted for new computer purchases. If the budget gap continues, we may have to take a look at that as something to perhaps hold on to. On the instruction side of things, obviously this is the biggest portion of the budget. The balance in the salaries represents essentially the substitute expenses that we would anticipate spending. And I've given you charts in the past before, but just to refresh you, the last couple of years with all the different directives and things coming down from the state as part of Race at the Top and teacher evaluation, and we're spending we're spending a larger portion of our sub budget on bringing in subs so that teachers can go into PD time. So instead of having a professional development day for the whole district, which is obviously very expensive, we're doing it in a more targeted fashion where certain subgroups of teachers are working in teams to do some of those things, whether it's putting together district-determined measures or working on curriculum to align with the state frameworks. Obviously, those changing to Common Core. So there's a lot of things that coming up that it's more cost efficient to use subs on a day-to-day basis than to just sort of put it out to everybody. But I just want people to understand and recognize that when we say our sub expense has gone up a lot the last couple of years, that it's not that just teachers are all of a sudden calling out sick a lot more than they used to. We're just using those funds for different purposes. So even though the total is higher, it is more cost effective, but obviously we'll have to keep a close eye on that. On the expense side of things, As you can see, about a third of that remains unspent, and we've actually told the principals and directors that we're freezing that portion of the budget for the time being. If they have emergency expenses that they need to purchase, then the superintendent and I will review those and take them on a case-by-case basis. But for the most part, we've put a freeze on that so that we can try to get some stabilization in the budget. As you know, as I think I've shared in the past, the principals have been very good about working together to manage their supply budgets. We've literally gotten to the point where we do count pencils and pieces of paper, and so that if one school has a surplus of something, that they'll share it with another school, so that people aren't stockpiling things. We've been doing that the last couple of years. It's worked out pretty well, and so we just continue to do that sort of thing. Under student services, again, the bulk of the overages on here is the transportation expense, because we had to add new buses due to the reorganization. What this doesn't reflect is the reimbursement we get from the state. Again, that's a reimbursement where you get it the following year. So the increased funds that we're spending in the current year, we should get back a larger amount next year. But again, that's contingent on the state budget. And in the past, it's been about 60%. So hopefully that can stay through. That could mean some additional funds for us next year. But as of right now, we have to absorb that cost. On the maintenance side, as we've talked about before, on the expense side of things, those include the moving expenses, the renovations to Matakees. We've had some other repairs to buildings that have been of an emergency nature that we've had to make, that we've had to cover. But again, we've pretty much frozen the things that are to the extent that we can. Obviously, if a facilities situation comes up where there's a leak in the roof or broken window, we have to fix it. But where we can, we're going to try to be conservative as we can. The big part, the other part that's out there is utilities. We're just heading into the winter. Hopefully, if we have a milder winter than we did last year, hopefully we have some savings there. But we don't want to count on that yet, so we're going to hold back on making any adjustments to the budget for at least a couple months on that. On the fixed charges, this is predominantly the employee insurance costs. So far, we've had costs have been less than expected. And again, this budget was put together a year ago. So and if you recall from an earlier presentation, we've had so many new people that have been hired. If somebody who's on a family plan gets replaced by somebody who's on a single plan or so on and so forth, then you recoup those savings in those exchanges. But everybody is getting everything they're entitled to. So I don't want the appearance to be that we have this balance of funds here because we're holding back. Everybody's getting what they're entitled to. It's just that due to staff changes, people are on different plans, and it ends up being a positive for the time being. Community services, again, this is the private school transportation that we're required to provide to St. Pius. Again, it's slightly over the budget because, again, when the budget was created, we hadn't received the bids for the new contract, so we're still providing the same level of service we have in past years. It's just a little more expensive than we thought it would be. And we talked about this the other night at the subcommittee. It's something we'll continue to look at and do the best we can with it, the most effective and efficient way within the bounds of the regulations, but in a way that is, I think, fair and equitable to everybody. Fixed assets, again, this is for equipment and minor projects. We did a couple over the summer, and then we put a halt on everything else. So that is available right now. Not much else to say there. On the debt service, again, this is fully corresponds with the revenue, so everything that gets budgeted either has been spent or will be spent. The balance in this should always be zero, which it is now. And lastly, on the out-of-district programs we talked about already, we're 25% over budget for that section. So again, just to recap where we're at, We have some, on paper, available funds for salaries, but project to spend most of that in the coming months on, again, substitute coverage for professional development and for advisor stipends for clubs and things like that. On the expense side, again, the out-of-district tuition is driving that and then some, and has created a situation for us which we are feverishly working on solutions to, and we'll continue to keep the committee updated on how that is proceeding. So lastly, back to, as you see, this all ties back together. We have our revenue projection for next year, which is really the first step of the budget process. And this is where you'll see how the E&D certification will affect the budget. So what we have here is what we actually had for revenue in FY13, what we are working with for the current fiscal year in 14, and what we propose for next year. Now, the town assessments, we are operating under the assumption that the town assessments will go up 2.5%. We haven't received any official word to that effect, but we haven't heard that the towns aren't operating under that thinking either, so that's what we're recommending we go with. On the debt service, those costs are what they are, based on the debt service schedule. The increase to next year is the addition of the Baker bonding. We originally had, if you remember, we originally had it under FY14. The postponement pushed out a principal payment to next year, so that increase of $250,000 is essentially adding that principal payment for Baker. So it's not really revenue that is available for other purposes. On state aid, we do anticipate a slight increase next year, largely due to the transportation reimbursement, because not only are we spending more in the current year that we would anticipate being carried over as a reimbursement next year, but also in the current year, we're expecting a larger reimbursement than we originally planned for. The state has been, and in particular the legislators from that come from legislative districts that have regional schools in them have been very diligent about advocating for that part of the budget. And they've been successful the last couple of years in getting that to be a higher number, so we're seeing the effects of that, so we think that'll carry over. On the local revenue, we see that essentially leveling off. The one unknown in the revenue side is how the solar is going to impact us. We have not planned on any revenue being offset anywhere in the budget yet. As the budget process goes forward, if we get more definitive answers or results or projections, we'll, I guess, consider putting those in there. But right now, we're trying to be very conservative. We don't want to include something in revenue that we're not very, very sure we're going to receive. So I know lots of dollar amounts and numbers are being bandied about. Until we have panels on roofs and on ground, we're basically taking the position that until the meter starts churning, we're not going to count any of that as revenue yet or as expense offset. The big line, as we talked about, tying it back to the very beginning, is the E&D. As I said, we applied $1.25 million to the current year's budget, but we were only certified at $608,000. And even though we've already received over $400,000 of what had been deducted, that amount is not added to it. It's not retroactively added in. So we don't have access to those funds to apply to FY15. We can only apply up to what has been certified as available. We did appeal to the Department of Revenue to say, hey, look, we got some of these funds in after the fact, and they said, well, that's the policy, and if we start making exceptions here, it's going to open it up to 350 other cities and towns, and they have to have a cutoff somewhere. So unfortunately, we didn't get the benefit of that. So for the current time, we're recommending $500,000 out of the six. Now, that's a higher percentage than, it's about 80 some odd percent. It's a higher percent than we've applied in the past couple of years, but as you said, we know we have that 400,000 plus that's there, that, again, all other things being equal, should be available and certified to put us back over $1 million, and again, depending upon how the current year's budget works out, could get added to it. So it shouldn't deplete us entirely. And again, as Steve had said, and referencing prior members who talked about this scenario, and the towns have talked about this scenario in the past too, that it's not an unlimited pool of funds to apply. But the impact of that is that it's $750,000 less than we applied this year. So even factoring that in, it's still a revenue increase of $716,000, but you need to take out the debt service because any of the increase in debt service is due to a corresponding increase on the expense side of things. So it's so like I said, that $250,000 increase in debt service is spoken for already. So really that leaves us with $466,000 or less than 1% increase on the revenue side of things for next year. Obviously that's not a lot. We're gonna have to really do a lot of diligent work over the next month or so to get to a budget to present to the committee that that reaches that goal. Obviously, the expenses can't exceed the revenues, and so that's where we're at right now. With the starting point for next year is a little less than $500,000 worth of growth. So that is the plethora of information that we have for you tonight, and I guess now I'll be happy to take questions or anything.
Mr. Edwards, please.
Could you explain again what happens? You got this $450,000 worth of money that we received that we can't use for this year. Where does it go, and when can it be used, so that people will know when they're looking at the thing? They're saying, okay, we're short. Well, no, not short, but we only applying 690. You know, we only have an E&D of 690, and we're only applying 500. What about that $500,000, that $400,000? What's the?
So I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain this. So when the DOR comes in next summer to evaluate and calculate the district's financial position as of June 30th of 2014, those funds would be in the pool to be counted as district funds, where they weren't this year. But because we have to, the committee has to vote on how much they're going to apply by February, you don't have those available to you. So if they come in next summer and say, okay, you had the 600,000 minus whatever you took out, plus you're adding back in not only from your current year, but from the prior year, the $425,000 or whatever that, or plus any additional funds we bring in the rest of the year will count towards that too. That will be our FY14 certified number, which would go towards the following, which would go towards FY16. Because there's a gap there because the number gets, for the 1 year, gets certified like 6 months after you adopt the number for the following year. So that's why there's a sort of a 2 year, in fiscal years, it's really a 1 year in calendar time, but it's it skips 2 fiscal years. So those funds, once they're certified next summer, become available for use either during the next fiscal year, if something arises and the committee desires to tap into them, or they just stay available to be applied to the FY16 budget, at which point in let's say it's $1 million for 16, then presumably we would come back with a recommendation of 700,000, 750, somewhere in that ballpark based on the ratios that have been applied in the past. So, I hope that
So
answers
what
the
you're
question.
what you're saying in a nutshell is the $425,000 that we receive now cannot be used for FY15. It basically goes into a bank account, in essence, until FY16, and it cannot be used for anything. So we
Right.
cannot tap into that money. Is that correct?
Right.
Is that in essence what we're talking about?
Yeah, it's essentially, you could think of it as an,
A savings account.
yeah, it's an uncertified
Right,
surplus.
right.
So
That
to
it
speak.
cannot be used
Right.
at all for next year.
Correct, because you can't, again, same as the towns with the free cash, they may have funds from unspent budgets and so on and so forth that, but until the state comes in and says, okay, we certify that as free cash or as E&D, you can't tap into it. So, the difference with us versus a town is that towns can come back and have special town meetings in the fall, because the certification process happens late summer or in the fall, and sometimes the towns will say, okay, well, let's come back in the fall when we know our certified free cash number, and then we can see if we want to make any changes. So again, theoretically, this committee could do the same thing, haven't in the past, at least since I've been here. But once that number is certified, you do potentially have that availability to use it as a resource. Obviously, in our current situation, the number went down, so it's not advisable, but in the past, when the number's been higher or has gone up, the potential did exist to tap into it in the current year once it's been certified. But again, given where we're at.
Larry,
don't
she's still not making it clear.
I mean-
That $425,000 that we have not been able to get certified
Right, it won't be certified
cannot
till
be
next fall.
used for FY15.
Not when you adopt the budget in February.
Correct.
Once the number gets certified, say next September, October,
What do you mean, for which year? For FY15?
well, it'll be the FY14 certification that takes place in
Which
the,
what we're
in the
doing
beginning.
right, so what we're doing right now, that 425 will come into play.
No,
Let
it
me-
won't.
Let me help.
I'm not.
No,
Yeah.
the money is gonna sit in the bank until it's recertified next year,
Right around this time.
right around this time. And so the money will sit in the bank, we can't touch it. What Larry's throwing out there, which is complicating things, and
Sorry.
personally, I wouldn't recommend it, is
My
that if we
apologies.
had a serious situation that we needed to take care of, we could make the towns aware that we have a roof that's falling apart, or whatever it might be, and that we need to spend some of our E&D that's certified next fall at this time, or before this time, on it. So both towns would have to agree with us that that was a legitimate, we'd have to bring it back to the towns, to a town meeting. So we can't spend it even next year after it's certified until FY 16, in that budget process, unless it was an emergency and we went back and again, there would be a process in place. So basically, this is gonna sit in the bank until it's recertified next year, and we'll have it added into next year, so. Unless something's burning down, I don't recommend that we spend
No.
it.
Mr. Morris, please.
This is more of a nature of a comment, but I would like your shaping it more correctly if I'm off. And by comparison, I remember the times when we've had, as a school system, our fixed costs, particularly health insurance, going up out of control of our being able to keep it down, and it would be frequently the fixed cost increases that we would be adding to our budget, which would add to the assessment pressure to the two towns. And it was, as I recall, there was frequently, from people who were not supporters of the public school budget, references to overspending at budget discussion times. What did not really get laid out easily, I know, particularly in the town of Yarmouth, that those same fixed costs were hitting the towns of all around the Commonwealth. As we look at an increase in expense and a decrease in available E&D, I think it's important that we have the ability to construct, not by a soundbite, but a simple, and I'm keying off of Steve's comment that it's complicated, but does this mean such and such? if our out-of-district tuition expenses have gone up, particularly in the sped area, we don't want to demonize our attempt to help all the kids, regardless of the expenses. After all, we have both legal and educational reasons. And if we have the unusual aspect of the normally reimbursed and therefore part of E&D expenses that you've laid out, we have therefore less of a picture to give to the towns for helping their, as part of our return to them. We have a long history of using our assessments in large quantities back to the town, lowering our assessments in terms of the bill we give them. We will have less of that this coming year, but I think the reasons are legitimate, and I like personally that you're laying this out now, because frequently we don't even hear of some of these expenses in past years until close to town meeting. So as we talk with the town halls and finance committees, I think we need to be very candid, but also very direct. These are the equivalent of increases in fixed costs or a decrease in anticipated revenue. It has nothing to do with the quality of the education or the quality of the fiscal responsibility. And I would certainly beat that drum, continue to beat that drum as much as we can. So my question is, have I said that accurately, and in terms of our conversations to people in the town, does that sail well enough?
I think that's accurate. Certainly, there are some expenses that exceeded our expectations, but I think the other piece of it is that we under-collected our revenue in a timely fashion to get it into the E&D, unbeknownst to us in terms of how that would play out. And some of it was really because we were doing everything we could to take care of the town's investment. So, for example, when the AME small lift wasn't working properly, we held back money to make sure that the vendors did what they needed to do. And so we didn't have all of our receipts available to give to the town so that we could receive the reimbursement in a timely fashion. So what we need to do is have some conversations with the selectmen and the town administrators to see if there's a way in the future, as we pay, like a pay-as-you-go kind of thing, can we collect that money back on an interim, basis as we spend? If the project is $80,000, when we spend the first 40, can we submit our bills? And then when we submit, get the next 6, 20, and like that. So that, because we were just waiting, which is what we've done in the past, and so perhaps that's not going to work so well for us. So I would say under-collected in terms of those sorts of things also might help.
As a follow-up, I thank you. That is a very good add-on. We obviously, in terms of our protecting the town's investments, our building committees and our maintenance has been really spectacular in terms of municipal construction. The Mattakey, the Wixon addition, the Station Avenue building, and the high school renovation all came in at or under budget. So we've certainly done the due diligence in taking care of that. So thanks.
Mr. Carey, please.
Just a couple, one or 2 points and one question. Letters of certification from the state or Commonwealth have gone to the town administrators, right? So this is, they know this.
Everybody already knows.
Right. So and I'm just wanting to make sure everybody's clear on that this isn't the first time they're probably hearing this. Not that it's good news, but it is the news. On the out-of-district placements, programs, and I know this is, what was our budgeted for last year? Is it any more?
For 13?
No, not for the year that we're in, for last year.
Right, for FY 13.
Yeah. Was it within and I know I'm catching you off guard, and I apologize for that,
Yep.
but is it any drastically different than what we budgeted for this year? I'm sorry.
I'm
Could
gonna-
you get back to me on that?
Yeah, I can. I
appreciate
mean,
it.
I'm gonna say with a fair amount of certainty, the amount we budgeted for out-of-district tuition in FY '13 was less than it was for FY '14.
Okay.
And
Yeah. No,
Because
I just, and what I'm,
we've seen trending increases in both the special ed and the choice and charter over
Okay.
the last several years.
right. And when I say out of district, I'm meaning more of the out of district special needs student.
If I could add
Okay,
something to that,
sure.
just as a point of information. I think it's House 96 is being considered right now in the state legislature. And as you know, the timing affects how these things are laid out. If a student comes to DY anytime up to April, we are responsible for the cost. So while we're building our budget, we take into account, like now, the principals and the directors have already turned in their budgets, so they took into account who was in our system at that point in time. So from, let's say, December to April, more students come in, well, we're already in the budget process, and we can't adjust for that.
Right.
So I believe it's House 96, if the legislature passes that, it will push that date back to, say, January 1st, which will be helpful to us. So that if, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, but the same thing happens to other districts. If a student leaves our district, goes to another district because they moved to another town and happen to be in an out-of-district placement of some sort that's very costly, that is a burden or an impact, shall we say, on their district budget. So the legislature is looking at pushing that date back so that districts have more accurate information when they're building their budgets, and to lessen the impact of what happens as we go through our budget process. So I just throw that out because I think it's pertinent to the
So
conversation.
if it's a House bill, then it's still in the House, and
It
it has to
is.
go to the Senate,
That's correct.
correct? Okay. And then my last point is just what the towns are proposing, and I know we're going on 2.5, but I think that we need to get some guidance from them on that.
Sure, we know we need to wait for something that they give us, but in the absence of that, we put that on the table just for your consideration.
And I think it's probably close, but I'm not, who knows, till we start hearing from them directly. Thank you.
Ms. St. Germain, please.
The increase due to transportation, I know it was a little surprise this year because how we changed busing schedules and how that happened, and you had to put on a few more buses. How does that look for next year? And have you taken into account the possibility of the change maybe at the high school? Have you started to figure that into what you're doing with the budget?
We, well, separate of the high school start time or any of the school start time, we're carrying over the current assumption that the number of buses we have on the road now, we're gonna have on the road next year. But we have been, ever since really the third or fourth week of school, when the routes settle in and so on, we're constantly looking at how do we get more efficient in the buses, in the busing scheme. This year in particular, we were ultra conservative in the number of buses because of the reorganization, and we were creating whole new routes for half the district. We're continuing to look at if there's ways to make those routes more efficient in the current year, and then those would carry over to next year. As far as changing the start times, I think we talked about a little bit when Mr. Jenks made his presentation at a prior meeting about obviously any change in the high school time is going to have to be offset or aligned with the other levels, because we can only have so many buses on the road at the same time. So depending upon how late the high school changes to, if that's the case, we may have to move the middle schools up, or potentially, I guess, the elementary schools could move up. I mean, there's all sorts of scenarios, but if the directive that we're operating under, both amongst ourselves as administrators and presumably from the committee, is that we can't have another big increase in busing, because right now we have 36 bus routes that costs what it costs. If one of our operating assumptions is that we're not going to have more than that, then we have to construct a school schedule that fits within that parameter. Because, I mean, we can construct a schedule that requires 55 buses on the road, but obviously that's going to cost a ton of money. So that's off the table. So if the guiding principle in creating our school schedule for next year is you can't have more buses than you have now, and it would be nice if you had less, while not making the bus rides an hour and a half, then that's where we're going to operate from. So we're in the very early stages of modeling some scenarios. The other wild card or factor or input into that situation is so currently this year, Wixon kept it the extended day that was at Emmy Small. Mattakese pulled back on it, and if they look to go back to that for next year, then that obviously has an impact, because that's been a large factor on the bus schedules as well, because different levels have different lengths of days, and it creates some conflicts for us. So we'll have to model that in there too. But I mean, our assumption is that we're not going to spend more next year than we are in the current year. And if there's a way to tighten it up even more, then obviously we want to aim for that without creating a decrease in the quality of service we provide.
Centering around the busing, is the rule that if you have a private school like St. Pius, that those students can't travel on the same bus as the DY students, or is there a ruling on that? I mean, I know they start at a different time, but I'm just...
That's the big challenge, is that I believe that their start time, their day is 8 to 2 something. Anybody know offhand? 8 to 2:45 maybe. So their start time is in between the high school and the middle school on both ends. So so what we do is we do use those St. Pius buses to do elementary routes. So we get half the efficiency of it, but if there was a way to align them, that's one of the things that we're continuing to look into, is how do we meet the requirements of that regulation within both the letter of the law as well as the spirit of it. And by that I mean, theoretically, I'm not advocating this, but just as an example of the spirit part, is theoretically we could put all those St. Pius kids on our high school buses, drop them off at St. Pius, but then they'd have to hang around for an hour or 45 minutes or whatever. It would save us some money, but I don't know how well that would go over. And same thing on the back end is, if, do we want to say, okay, you have to wait a half an hour after school gets out before we can send a bus to you? I think we probably could do that, but I'm certainly not recommending that. We had some preliminary discussions with the folks over there last year when we were trying to develop this year's schedule, and they indicated to me that they were open to discussing their school times to align with ours for the busing piece, but there's all sorts of other implications on their end that it has. It's not just because there are kids from other towns. There are the kids who don't take the bus. There's other transportation issues. So it's a little bit complicated to do, but we're going to continue to explore it to the extent that, like I said, we continue to meet the letter of the regulation, but also the spirit of it. But it's tricky because where it gets to the point where it has, negative impacts. And even negative is probably too harsh a word, but where it has impacts on our ability to provide services to DY students it's one of those things where I think we're obligated to take a hard look at it and, try to find some resolution that works for everybody. So we'll continue to look at it, and if we have anything that we feels worthy of a recommendation, we'll absolutely bring it to the committee for its consideration, so.
My last two questions are, do we have any idea if the state will increase the amount of money they give us for transportation? And also, under that same area from the state, if our special education amounts go beyond a certain percentage, does the state figure that in, or they just, how do they go about doing those two things?
On the transportation reimbursement, the way it works is the legislature and the governor, through their process, they approve a line item, which I think is roughly, say, $45 million for the state. But the way the reimbursements work is, and it's for regional districts only, is the states, the districts rather, submit claims on how much they have spent. And the state only has, let's say it's $45 million. And if in a particular year the claims equal $90 million, then they just do the math and they divvy up the $45 million proportionally so everybody gets 50%. So you have to try to project the percentage you're going to get, because you already know what your expenses are for the current year. So you try to project the percent you're going to get, but you also have to try to project out what the total of the state budget's going to be. So as I said during the presentation, the legislators who have regional districts, like Representative Turner and Senator Wolf and them, have been very diligent at the State House in advocating for that line item, because they know it's a big expense. So that line item in the last year or two has gone up in the bottom line, and the amount given back to regional districts has gone up somewhat as well. We're over $1 million now, where in the past we've been in the $800,000 range. So, and that's part of what contributed to the E&D number for last year. So as far as next year, I mean, we're going to assume that that the state number is level funded. Our number is going to go up, we know. What we don't know is what the other districts are doing. So we're going to probably assume that the percentage is about the same, that'll be about the same. We'll apply that percentage to our expense, and that's what we'll put in for the number. And that's why in the projection you saw that the state aid we project to go up a little bit next year. So I hope that answers that part of the question. And then the special ed, the extraordinary circumstance causes, I think it's a 25% increase from year over year, makes you eligible to apply for it. So as in prior years, in January, DSC has put out a notice to districts that if you have a year-to-year increase that meets or exceeds that percentage, you're eligible to apply, similar to the circuit breaker process, but you're doing it in the current year, and you have to fill out paperwork and go through a review process. And again, it's the amount that you would potentially get back is based on how much they receive for claims. So let's say we put in $500,000 and other districts put in a lot big amounts too, then they've got one bottom line number that they've got allocated for it. They'll go through the math, they'll proportionally distribute it based on what they approve as claims, and then we would hopefully get those funds back in the spring for the current year. So that would be a big help to the current year, but that's, at least a couple of months out before we would know. So we're not going to, again, we try to be conservative with those kind of things. We're going to manage the current year's budget as if we would not get those funds, and make decisions or recommendations based on not doing that. And if that money does come in April or whenever, then terrific. It gives us a little bit of a cushion. But that way, if it doesn't, we've at least done our diligence in the meantime to prepare for it. So I guess it's kind of prepare for the worst and plan for the best, or whatnot.
I can see more and more why the towns get a little frustrated, because we have no idea we have no crystal ball. We don't really know all the time what some of these costs will be. I mean, they can mushroom very quickly. And while when you listen to the towns, more or less their figures seem to be a lot more constant because they can predict those things where we can't. You can't predict if a child comes into your district or a child is within your district and needs more services. You want to give it to the child. You're not going to hold it against them, but that's what has to be. Or if the bus routes have to change because you're meeting different requirements. But it is frustrating, but it's good that we talk about it so we all are pretty clear about what's going on. Thank you.
I have a comment while we're on the transportation issue. It's not a question, but I've heard varying questions or comments by parents. There'll be a parent on this hand that will say, geez, my ride, my students on the bus is pretty long. And somebody from this side saying, geez, I saw a bus go by and it looked like it was only half full, quarter full. Well, that's what we're trying to do with those smaller buses, is make the rides shorter. So if folks could maybe see a bigger picture when they're maybe seeing a bus go by that's not completely full, cut it some slack and think those kids now have a shorter ride, although it may not be full, but that's kind of something for the multitude of folks at home that are watching this and listening to keep in mind.
Yeah,
it looks like he has something to
no,
say.
just going to tag along on that, and that's one of the consequences or outputs of the reorganization at the middle school level, is that on those routes in particular, a larger portion of the bus route time is spent between the last pickup and the destination, because you've got to take a bunch of buses from Yarmouth and get them over to Wixon, and vice versa from Dennis and get them over to Mattakese. And we're trying to keep them with under 45 minutes, but to get from, if you have a route in South Yarmouth or West Yarmouth, to get to Wixon takes 15 minutes. So that leaves you 30 minutes to pick up kids. And because we're so geographically, and we knew this going into it, that the bus routes for the current year were going to be dictated a lot more by geography than number of riders. So we erred on the side of being conservative in that, as you said, we didn't want kids having excessive rides. I mean, yeah, the buses could certainly be, some of the routes could be fuller, but it would take longer to complete them, and we didn't think that was the best idea. So that was the trade-off that we made. But as we're settling into the patterns and we see the where the stops are, continue to keep a look at it, and if there's opportunities to make adjustments, consolidations, whatnot, then obviously we're going to do those, as long as they continue to balance the needs of the district's bottom line, but also doesn't have a negative impact on the kids, because we're trying to keep that in mind. So, but yeah, this is a good point. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yes.
Just add something to that. I think it's a problem that's not uncommon across the state. In some places, like the place where I used to live, the town was very large geographically. Now, this was just one town. It wasn't because they decided to regionalize or any of that. It was just a large town. And so the buses that we sent to the outer limits of the town lines had fewer students on them because they had a long distance to go. And so I think it's very common. We have kids that go to Cape Cod Tech. Now I know I'm talking about high school, but kids that go to Cape Cod Tech, that come from Mashpee. That's a long ride. So there are lots of places in the state and across the country, I'm sure, where kids have long rides, but we made a commitment to our parents. And that was probably, Larry will tell you, was the number one question that we got during the reorganization. By far, the thing people cared most deeply about. And so we tried to listen to our customers. And in doing so, it cost us a little more money. So that's that's what happens when you're trying to provide excellent customer service. And so we feel that we did listen to what they wanted, and we did provide that, and that will make some buses have fewer kids, and in a few cases, maybe they're on there for 40 minutes.
I had one other question, and it's a very small portion of your presentation. One of the line items, 9,200, out-of-state tuition, which was budgeted for 0. What would constitute an out-of-state tuition? I'm guessing that it's perhaps one extenuating circumstance, but I don't want any specifics. I don't
You are
wanna-
correct.
Okay, I can leave it at that. It's one particular.
And the reason the budget is 0 is because, again, when this budget was developed a year ago, that situation didn't exist. Which is why when we monitor and analyze the special ed tuition budget, we just look at the bottom line. For state reporting, we have to categorize them based on the type of placement, whether they're a collaborative or residential, public or private. So we charge them to the accounts that are appropriate, and the budgets, some are over, some are under. We just look at the bottom line. I mean, again, the bottom line is we're way over. But you're going to have those one or two that kids age in, age out, they move in, they move out, and so that's what that is. But yeah, it's, as far as I know, that's one child, one placement.
Mr. Morris, please.
Just a brief observation. I noticed as we talk about a decrease in some revenues uncollected and an increase in some expenses, nevertheless, you have the phrase under instruction, unencumbered portion of expense budget has been frozen aside from urgently needed supplies. In other words, you implemented a freeze, you decrease the expenses, so the lines at the end of our projected budget, even without the state coming in yet, we're down to a percentage point of after all that ups and downs that you have to. Now, we have no taxing power, of course, we all know that. We can't increase the assessment once the budget is set in April and May. Towns will frequently wait until, and our own 2 member towns have done this as well. They wait until the cherry sheet is in to see what free cash they might have for handling salaries, for example. So it's 2 different ways of doing budgets because it's 2 different levels of service and legal requirements. I'm impressed that with all that back and forth, you're within that small number.
Anyone else on the board have any questions for Larry? Very good. Thank you, Mr. Azer. Next on our agenda is our superintendent's report. Please, Mrs. Woodbury.
Okay, after all that, I think you could use some good news. Earlier this afternoon, I was at the Dennis Police Station where the Education Foundation for Dennis-Yarmouth gave out their grants to a variety of people this year, thanks to the hard work of the Education Foundation members and those who support them. They were able to give out over $10,000 worth of grants, and it was really fantastic. So I'd like to just make you aware of many of our teachers who stepped forward and did the hard work of putting together a grant, and we're very proud of the hard work that they did. And if you were there, as I was, and also Mrs. St. Germain and Patrick Hanberry, who has joined the board over there now, you'll know that these teachers had wonderful creative ideas, and it really is enhancing what we're able to do here. So from Matakees Middle School, Amy Ferreira had a program in outdoor field studies. Regina Wood had some interesting science equipment for testing velocity, and she talked a lot about some of the hands-on science activities that she's doing in her classroom. That sounded very exciting. Elena Shook, our librarian at Matakees, enticing ebooks, and it's about getting ebooks available for students, and they can also use them at home and access them from home. And for every book that she's able to buy with her grant, this company would give her 2 additional books. So talk about making your money stretch. At the high math adaptive technology for English language learners and other students with varying needs. In the WAVE program, painting the town red, and that was from Abir Zaineth, and she will be going out with her students out in the community. We also have a gardening project going on at the high school. Shane Brennan and Carl Dupuis, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. I believe they're starting to cook with their things in the cafeteria. Might help our budget. Emmy Small and Baker schools had preschoolers unplugged. That was Sue Gubbins, Beth Hollister, Suzanne Ferreira, Carol Conway, and Nancy Timoney. Also, Emmy Small, Carol Deppen with the Family Literacy Backpack Project. Also at Emmy Small, going graphic, and it's using graphic books. That's Kim Keith and the librarian. At Ezra Baker, also using graphic novels for ELL students and reluctant readers, Kelly Deppen, the librarian there. Also at Baker, Understanding My Friends with Autism, a partnership between Jeanette Call, Amy Young, and Brooke Leidner. Sounded very interesting. Writer's Workshop at Baker, done by Lynn Brown using some of the Lucy Calkins work. And Ezra Baker, Ellen Flanagan, who is our Dean of Students, had applied and received a grant for the Penny Harvest program. At Station Avenue, Rebecca Bunce received a grant for the Family Literacy After School Club. And the librarian at Station Ave received a grant for Research Science project. And that's the extent of that. So very proud of our teachers and what they've accomplished, and thank them for going the extra mile. Yes, Cheryl? It's about the Education Foundation, I'm sure. No, go ahead. You can make the announcement.
My apologies for not being here punctually for the public comment period, but as Superintendent Woodbury was bringing up, the outstanding number of grant awards that the Education Foundation was able to do this year, we're actually in our fundraising mode right now for next year's recipients. So I'd like to invite all of you to purchase tickets for the Spaghetti Supper at Jack's Outback. This is one of our local vendors. The restaurant hosts the entire meal, and all the proceeds goes to the Education Foundation. Tickets are $12 a piece, and you can purchase them directly at Jack's Outback or by calling me, and I'll put my number out there, 508-364-9995. And we are very appreciative. The Red Cottage, we had one at Red Cottage November 10th, I think. I can't even remember now the date. But it was a great success. We had at least 100 people came and had a wonderful beef stew supper, a lot of camaraderie and kind of communion with your fellow education supporters. So it was great. So really encourage you to, if you can't make it, donations are always gratefully accepted. Thank you so much. Oh, I should announce it. It's Saturday, December 14th. There's two seatings, one at 5 and one at 6:30. It's a spaghetti supper, and they make 4 different types of sauces for your pasta, and include salad. The desserts are donated, unless somebody hasn't told me, but the desserts are donated by the culinary school at Cape Cod Tech. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Yes.
So our thanks to the members of the Education Foundation for their fundraising and hard work that make these grants possible. Also do you want to announce the January fundraiser, since you're here?
Well,
You can
now
tell
you
that
brought
these
it up.
two selectmen are members of the board.
And Cheryl always lets me be a fabulous waitress, hopefully on that night.
Yes.
It's one time a year I get to do it. But again, thank you to Carol. It takes a lot of people to put all this fundraising together, and then today to sit there and see those grant recipients. It's very rewarding. It's a lot of great stuff. But we're organizing also a bowling fundraiser for January 17th, thanks to Ryan Family Amusement. It'll be from 5 to 7 p.m. So hopefully everybody can come out and support the Education Foundation on that
Mark
too.
your calendars.
Yes.
Thanks.
And anybody can contact me if they have any questions. 508-737-2434 to reserve your lane. Thank you.
Okay, great.
I'm not putting my number out there.
Okay, some other news. Over at Baker, aside from the grants, they've been busy starting their school-wide book group. This year, every family at Ezra Baker Innovation School will read Stuart Little. And so each family will receive a copy of the book in January, along with a schedule of weekly reading assignments. Special educator and cable TV producer Jean Ryan will begin taping different staff members reading chapters of the book this week. These reading segments will air on channels 22 and 99 beginning in January. And if you haven't caught it yet, we're still doing the reruns of The Cricket in Times Square from last year. Yours truly read the last 2 chapters. So I've been called upon for Stuart Little again this year. We'll see if I can make it. Calling all talented volunteers, Baker is very busy planning its first round of after-school activities, and they're seeking parent and community volunteers to share an interest or talent with a small group of students for an hour a week for 5 weeks. By using volunteers to staff the activity program, we're able to keep student costs for participation at only $15 for a 5-week session. Over at Station Avenue, the Related Arts program is moving full steam ahead and adding a little more art to the curriculum: science, technology, engineering, art, and math, working the A back into STEM. At the Station Avenue Library, the DY High School WAVE program is helping the students out with the recycling program, and they're shelving books in the library as well. First graders in Mrs. Ostrom's class participated in Journey North's symbolic monarch butterfly migration. In Mr. Spano's class, first graders learned about different building materials. They listened to different versions of the 3 Little Pigs. And they worked together in teams to build houses out of straw, pencils, and Legos. And the different buildings were tested with a hairdryer to see which ones were the strongest. In Phys Ed at Station Avenue and Phys Ed and Health, the students have been learning about nutrition and fitness using the My Plate model. They're learning about the food groups, creating their own My Plate, and labeling a variety of foods that belong to each group. In addition, the students are recording a daily diet of what they have consumed and using My Plate bingo cards to learn the new foods for each group. In the music program at Station Avenue, 2nd grade students are playing mallet instruments, xylophones, metallophones, and glockenspiels, using quarter and eighth note rhythms and spoken rhymes, reinforcing math and reading skills. Oh boy, I hate it when we have initials. So Mrs. Eichner might have to help me because I don't think I remember what these initials mean. As members of the Mid-Cape CFCE, okay, we think it's community and families and community and educators. That doesn't sound right, but okay, we'll find out. Anyways, the Mid-Cape CFCE Council, Emmy Small, is partnered with the Cape Cod Child Development Families United Network, also an acronym, FUN, to offer a playgroup for children ages birth through 5 and their caregivers. The playgroup is called Preschoolers Unplugged, and it's starting on November 7th, and you heard that they are grant recipients, and it's been wonderfully attended. Coordinated family and community engagement. The playgroups held at Emmy Small Thursday mornings from 9:30 to 11, and the teachers offer creative activities designed to stimulate the brains of young children and share how families can handle the influx of media in their families' lives. Interpretive services for Spanish-speaking families are available, and space is limited, however, and there's still a few openings for the next 3 sessions for those who are interested. Registration is required. Please call our early education program to register, 508-778-7989. 3 of our, and I talked about the grants, so I'll skip that. At the Wixon Innovation School, Create the Good, the Dennis Police Department and the students and parents are working to collect and organize donations of food and other items to support 25 families at Thanksgiving. Each family received a turkey dinner and other non-perishable items. The donated food was organized by Priscilla Belrose, school social worker, with the support of Marilyn Martin, our district nurse leader, and Marge Cook, a retired assistant principal. Wixon's first concert is December 12th at 7 p.m. in the auditorium for the 5th grade band, chorus, and orchestra will be the performers. Wixon parents have volunteered to staff the Scholastic Book Fair beginning December 10th and continuing through December 16th. The fair will be open each day from 7:45 to 4 o'clock p.m. And the fair will also be open during the holiday concert. On behalf of our students, we thank the volunteers who've signed up to help out. Special thanks to Rick Bishop, event chairperson. Over at Mattakees, the annual 6th grade water festival will be held on December 6th in the gymnasium, and 2 holiday concerts are planned at Mattakees. The 7th grade concert on December 11th at 7 p.m., and the 6th grade concert on December 18th at 7 p.m. We've already heard about this being Super Bowl Saturday, and just in case you were wondering where you will be sitting, the DY section is section 114, and we will be sitting behind our band. So get there early and get your seat. There's also going to be a free strings and chorus concert on Tuesday, December 17th at 7 o'clock p.m. at the high school auditorium. The play, The Trojan Women, will be presented by the DY Theater Company at 7 p.m. on Thursday, December 12th, Friday, December 13th, and Saturday, December 14th. As I mentioned earlier, spinach and kale have been grown by the members of the Horticulture Club, and they are growing them in the greenhouse up at the school, and my understanding they've had a lot of spinach. These were being used in soups that were recently made up at the high school, and I know that through a lot of our farm-to-school things that are going on at various schools throughout the district, we've seen a lot of that happening, and so it was great tonight to have 2 of our high school teachers, Mr. Brennan and Mr. Dupuis, receiving their grant, and the good news was they got hooked up with Ellen Flanagan from Baker on the farm-to-school grant, and I made them aware that there were also great things going on over here at Station Avenue as far as gardening goes. So we're trying to hook up all our gardeners throughout the district. Finally, I'd like to read an email that I received from Selectman Bergeron, and he says, "Good morning, Carol. I wish to convey what an inspiring experience I had at the Wixon Innovation School this Thursday. I was scheduled to deliver a 15-minute talk regarding the topic of homelessness to all students as part of a planned activity, which would include the entire student body walking the perimeter of the school grounds. I was up first. When I arrived, I entered the auditorium to the booming sounds of Fats Domino, I'm Walking. Sadly, I remember Fats during his heyday. Students were dancing, as was the staff, and my first thought was, what has Mrs. Mazzetti done to me? The thought of having to settle down the entire 4th and 5th grades and make my presentation all within 15 minutes seemed daunting. I quickly experienced some teaching flashbacks that were not flattering. Mr. Jenks, you can relate to this, I'm sure. To my amazement, the students settled in quickly, and together we engaged in an interactive experience. The students were enthused, inquisitive, and compassionate, and asked some terrific questions. The positive energy I experienced at Wixon was almost palatable. This does not happen by accident. The administration, staff, parents, and students together have created an atmosphere that is nurturing, supportive, and most importantly, exciting. Happy and enthused students learn best. Kudos to Emily Mazzetti and her entire team for a job well done. I hope this letter earns me an invite to return to in the future. Please share this missive with the school committee. Thank you, Wayne Bergeron and Dennis Selectman. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Woodbury. Any questions for Ms. Woodbury? Mr. Edwards?
Carol, I just got a question. On our STEM program, are we going to be getting any 3D printers? Because, no, and apply for grants? Because I was looking at I was watching on CNBC, and they actually had the guy interview who, the company was MyBox or Matebox, and they are actually making stuff. And I was just wondering that would be a very good thing for our STEM program, because the kids can actually print it and make it, depending upon what they want. So it's something that I saw.
Yes, I've been reading a lot about those myself. I don't believe we have one yet, do we, Mr. Jenks? But certainly if someone would like to make a donation, that would be really,
Because there's a printer, and then there's also materials that actually make it. And I was just
Yeah.
thinking, I was seeing, the announcer, the television announcer, she made bracelets and things like that, but I could see how a program like that could be very good for our STEM program, and to create something where we go to, the fairs and things like that, as opposed to, putting it on a piece of paper and mache,
yes, it'd be something we'd love to do.
Ms. St. Germain, please.
I have one comment and one question. When I went to the Dennis Police Station today to listen to all the money and recipients for the grants, I was so impressed that with the penny harvest, we're the only school on Cape Cod who does that. And we're teaching our students how to be givers in the future and support philanthropic things. So kudos to us, because that was awesome. And my question was, the theater company on December 12th, 13, 14, is that what you said? And what is that? What is that all about, the theater company?
Well, you have to have a name for your group. So, DY, now we have a theater instructor, Roger Shoemaker. I think you may have read about him in the Register a few weeks ago. A wonderful man who has stepped forward to work with our students. And so we just like you'd say if there's the football team, well, this is the theater club. So, yes. And I believe you had the dates correct. Let me just double check. Yes, it's called the Trojan Women. The Trojan Women. The Trojan Women will be presented by the DY Theater Company, 7 p.m. on Thursday, December 12th, and Friday, December 13th. Probably Saturday. Is that also in the evening, 7 o'clock? Okay, I wasn't sure. So all three, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 7 o'clock.
Anyone else? While we're talking about fun things going on, I'll touch on the calendar a little bit if I may. Lots of fun things coming up in December with the holidays, and when our schools take advantage of that. December 10th, it's a Tuesday, is a 7 o'clock concert at Station Ave. I believe that's what the 7s infer. Wednesday, December 11th, at 7 p.m. at Mattakese Middle School is a grade 7 concert. We had heard about on December 14th, the Education Foundation fundraiser at Jack's Outback. Our next meeting will be December 16th, Monday at 6:30 here at Station Avenue. December 17th, as Ms. Woodbury mentioned in her report, the high school will be having its holiday concert at 7 p.m. and I love going to that. It's really cool. December 18th, the next day, the Wednesday, will be a Mattakese grade 6 holiday concert at 7 p.m. And then Friday, December 20th, at 10 a.m. at Ezra Baker is a concert, and there's also a concert at Emmy Small on Friday the 20th. So lots of stuff, and I would think that parents should pay attention to their individual schools, as there may be some during the day concerts. I know that some of the schools have had those in the past. Thank you for indulging me. Our next item is our consent agenda.
Move the consent agenda as presented in the,
We have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. I'd like to read the donations. A donation of a large horseshoe table donated by Mr. and Mrs. Katoya of South Yarmouth for use by the Station Avenue Elementary School students, and a donation from the Hyannis Elks Lodge 1549 who donated dictionaries to all grade 3 students at the Baker School. The books will be taken home at the end of the school year. We'd like to thank them very much for their donations. So we have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'd like to take a vote. All in favor of the consent agenda? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. I think this is where we might cue Mr. Edwards.
Motion
Mr.
to,
Edwards,
motion adjourned?
Before you adjourn, could we wish everyone a happy Hanukkah?
Yeah. We wish everyone a happy Hanukkah, and motion to adjourn.
Second.